Are you tired of the same boring sports talk shows? Has your hunger for SEC sports yet to be filled? Well, worry no longer. You have arrived in the waiting room with Dr. SEC, where the sports talk is unbiased, refreshing, and impossible to duplicate.
Welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thank you, Peter. I'm really happy to be on. Thanks for reaching out.
Well, I know that this is the time of year you should be slowing down just a little bit, as it's a dead period, or at least wasn't a dead period for recruiting, and then signing day will come in a few weeks, and then spring. But this is kind of supposed to be kind of a dead, kind of slower period. It hadn't been at that at all for you, has it?
No, I thought after covering football all season long that after the new year with basketball it'd slow down just a little bit, but with all this news breaking, all these coaches changes around the SEC, it's just getting busier and busier. Can't get a break.
Yeah, well, one of the ones we wanted to have you on today to talk about is, of course, Todd Grantham, who was defensive coordinator at the University of Georgia, has now left for Louisville, getting $1 million a year, and in comes Jeremy Pruitt from Florida State University. And I want to ask you, you were able to go down to the press conference yesterday and able to cover that for CSS. What was the environment like at the press conference?
Yeah, I cover a lot of Georgia sports, obviously, and I was able to go down to the press conference and hear what he had to say. And, Peter, I've been to a lot of press conferences, Georgia press conferences all around the SEC, and I've never seen one so packed. The energy of the media, they were so excited to hear from him, all smiles around the room, an absolutely packed room. And one comment he made was kind of really resonated with me. He said that there was more media at that press conference for him than there was at his BCS championship press conference. He said something like, you're at the right school when you've got as many folks here today as I did at the national championship game. So a great energy, and I think it was just such a good hire for Coach Rick in Georgia.
Absolutely, and absolutely, I think needed. I mean, last season went in with such high expectations, and they did lose the first game of the year, but it turned the corner so quickly with the wins against LSU and wins against South Carolina. And then, as you know very well, covering the Bulldogs, the injury bug just hit in ways I've really never seen before. It's such a important players at skill positions. And it just put almost a gloom over the program. I mean, I cover them, as well as 13 other teams from a distance, but you're there every day. It's almost like a gloom went over the program over the last few months, and this has kind of lifted that in its sunshine again.
Yeah, you don't want to ever put the blame on one person's back, but really when Todd Gurley got that ankle sprain, He was so important to the offense. He was such a leader and just, the rock to the offense. As soon as he got that ankle sprain, they lost the next two games when he was out. Then when he comes back in, they win back-to-back games against Florida, App State. I mean, you never want to put ever on the back of one player, but that injury, I think, really hurt the Dogs in the middle of their 4-game win streak. But then you have more injuries than Rick said he has ever seen in his coaching career. It absolutely hurt the Dogs. We've played the what if game on our show all season long. What if this player didn't get hurt? You can play that all year long. But the fact of the matter is it happened. You had injuries. 8-5, not exactly what you want, but they have an entire offseason now to get healthy, and hopefully they can, really get back and refresh next season.
Well, they've made a major change. We had Aaron Murray on the show a couple of days ago, and I really felt bad for him that this change didn't come earlier, because they've really put up some great offenses over the years, but the defense just hasn't performed up to the standard consistently. And Pruitt has quite a resume for such a short college career. However, while he was at Alabama and while he was at Florida State, he was rarely allowed to talk to the media because they both have the one voice policy where the head coach does the bulk of anything with the media. What was your initial impression of Pruitt's speaking with the media, and is he ready for that task?
I got the impression that everyone just had so much respect for the guy. He was very outspoken, very well-spoken, very focused, passionate. But something that Coach Rick said along the lines of respect is that when he introduced Pruitt to the team for the first time, and this was only 24 hours after Todd Grantham took the Louisville job, is when he hired Pruitt. He said it was like basically their one and only hire. They had their eye on him the entire time when Grantham stepped down. But what he said is when he introduced him to the team for the first time, the team broke out in applause. And they did it again 30 minutes after he was speaking. Everyone was just clapping. He said he has never seen that in the history of his entire coaching career. So a lot of respect for him, rightfully so, coming off a national championship. And you mentioned that, his short resume there. I don't know, he's just got a lot of respect. But what we have to remember is that he's not Todd Grantham. He's not going to get out on the field, have feuds with coaches like James Franklin in 2011. So he might not have that type of excitement, but he is very focused and passionate when he was talking. And I think he's going to be a really good face for the Georgia defense.
Now, you mentioned the players and the excitement of the players. I remember when all of this first broke, I was on Twitter, and I began to watch some of the players' reaction. And, of course, the first reaction that I saw that really stood out was prior to the Pruitt hiring. That's when Todd Grantham left, and Chase Vassar, senior linebacker, said, well, now at least the best players will get on the field. And you kind of got, wow, that was kind of a stinger. And then I began to watch as they hired Pruitt, and it was just amazing, the excitement of the players. I mean, talking now about national championships, talking about, how excited they are like children on Christmas, and a lot of the comparisons they made in their own words. And, of course, that's a great thing because it brings confidence back to the Bulldogs and that they needed. But let me ask you, when you were there and you kind of touched on it, I guess you kind of got that same feeling while covering the story. The players were really excited.
Yeah, you mentioned something about, maybe the best players will play now. Well, he actually said something like, we won't always give you what you want, but I'll give you what you earn. He's going to be all about free reign and fair out on the field. They are going to play the best players. On Twitter, I think Rick even tweeted something. He said the best is yet to come for Georgia. Yeah. There's just so much excitement. I've never seen so much excitement from the Georgia fan base about this hire. Just, a lot of passion around this. And I think, the last year the defense was so disappointing. Every year the Bulldog Nation says, this is our year. This is our SEC championship year. I really do think with him, if they can get the defense in line, they've got a lot of those young players coming back. You've got Todd Gurley. You've got Hudson Mason, who people say might even be better than Murray on offense coming back. I think they can do some major damage in the SEC. And, Twitter Nation has been really good to the Dogs with this hire. It could have been the opposite, but very good on that.
Absolutely. And you touched on something that as I didn't really, to be honest, I'm so busy covering the SEC, I rarely get a chance to really, dab into the other teams anymore. And I looked at Florida State, obviously, as a national championship game, but I didn't really look into Jeremy Pruitt that much until the hire. And on yesterday's show, we had a couple guys from the Florida State media come in, one from 247 Sports and another one from a newspaper down there. And they, they kind of cover him on a daily basis. And they begin to point out some things I didn't realize. They had 8 new starters last year, and they had 26 interceptions on defense. I mean, that was just I was, 8 defensive touchdowns. And, all year last year, we kept hearing the reason the defense is struggling is because there's so many new starters, because there's so many young players. But Pruitt has proven that he can take that and make it a winner right away, and Dogs fans got to be excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before he took over at FSU, I think their turnover margin was like -5, and then they were first in the nation in that category. Defensive scoring, Georgia was 79th, and FSU was first in that category. Yeah. Something along those lines. He was such a factor at FSU. I didn't really pay attention much to those stats until after the BCS championship. I'm like, wow, he's, coached at Alabama. He won state championships at high school before that. Not a lengthy college coaching career, but very good resume. And he has been able to put up some really great numbers on defense. You mentioned those younger players. I'm not sure what the problem was with Todd Grantham. Everyone was blaming the younger players. I mean, in 2011, they had the 5th-ranked overall defense in the country. Then you plummet in 2012. I think they were like 23rd. Last year, they were 45th. I mean, there was a huge drop-off, and everyone was blaming the younger players. I'm not sure that was the problem, but I don't know. We'll have to see if he can turn those freshmen and sophomore that were last year. They'll be a little bit older this year. We'll see if Pruitt, what he can do with them. And if he comes in there and proves that it wasn't the youth, it was the system, then maybe we'll have to see what he can do. But he actually said in his press conference, one of the things that he says is he's going to keep Grantham's 3-4 system. Obviously, you have to make adjustments when adjustments are necessary, but he's going to keep the same system. He said he wants to do everything Georgia's way. So if he's going to keep their system, it'll be really interesting to see the differences that he can make on defense this upcoming season.
Absolutely. Now, you've already gave us an absolute a great amount of gleamings from the press conference. So I hate to ask this question so late in the interview, and feel free to repeat yourself once again because you've gave us so many gleamings already. But if you had to pull one or two things that he said out of the press conference that really resonated with you and really stuck out to you, what would those be?
Yeah, I mean, the press conference was like 45 minutes long, and I was trying to absorb as much information as possible sitting there. I didn't have a recorder or anything. But one of the things that I think Bulldog Nation is just going to go nuts over, and, I don't know if it's the money talking or not. I personally don't think so, being in that room. But someone asked him, why would you leave FSU? You just won a national championship. You've only been there for 1 year. I was surprised that he left after 1 year after so much success. But it was his response, and everyone in the press conference just kind of smiled. He goes, why wouldn't I? And he wasn't trying to make the guy who asked the question feel bad. His face kind of got red. But he looked at him like, why wouldn't I? This is the SEC again. This is Georgia. He said, like I said, I don't know if it's the money talking, but he said, I think Georgia is the best team in the SEC. The SEC is the best conference. He said this is basically his dream job. He was saying that he's waited 11 years to get this job. And, I mean, Coach Rick was smiling. He was smiling. It just really surprised me how passionate he was about being at Georgia, wearing his black and red G on his little pullover that he had on. I mean, it was that was my favorite thing that he said. It kind of lifted the energy in the room from this is so serious newsy to something a little bit more lighthearted. Yeah. And the other thing that I already did say that I was going to take from his press conference was that he was going to stick to Grantham's 3-4 system, how he's going to do everything Georgia's way. And I just think that's interesting because of all the problems they had last year. So really it's going to be a huge test. And I think the eye's going to be on the defense all season. And if one thing goes wrong, they're going to be blaming the defense. But I just think he's such a good hire. And another thing that he said, he told Rick that he wants to help out on special teams. And Rick said that was music to his ears, is that, they don't have a special teams coordinator. Yeah. Everyone wants that 10th coaching position, which we don't know if that'll happen or not. But he said he wants to help on special teams. They need help on special teams. Yes. We saw all the issues they had last year, despite Marshall Morgan being awesome. Yeah. But he won't be there. So he's such a well-rounded coach, and he said so many things I can't think. But those were the things that really sat with me.
That's awesome. We sure appreciate that. Now, when Grantham was hired, I remember it just seemed like it was yesterday, and it's been a few years now. And one thing I liked about Grantham was he had a good pedigree. He'd been under a lot of good coaches. He had the NFL experience, so you knew he was an intelligent guy. And, of course, I think that may have played against him a little bit. From what I understand, his system was a little too complex at times and a little too much at times for the college game. And I know watching from the press box a couple times this year, Georgia, you could just see, before the ball even snapped, secondaries trying to figure out where they're supposed to be at, what's going on. But one thing I liked about him was he was more fiery, where Rick is more laid back. And there needs to be a balance there. But that balance almost became almost conflictive at times, and it seems on the surface that Pruitt and Rick are a better fit than Rick and Grantham were. That that you're not going to have to worry about Pruitt jumping on the field and throwing a choke sign at the Florida team, or which I'll say this, and now Vanderbilt fans didn't agree then, they'll agree with me now. I didn't blame them for the Vanderbilt situation simply because Franklin had no right talking to a Georgia player. But you're not going to see that from Pruitt, I don't think. But I think you'll find that same passion. Do you think Pruitt and Rick are going to be a better fit on the surface?
We'll have to wait and see for that. But what my take on Rick being laid back and Grantham being more energetic, as I like to call it, is that Rick was always looking for that spark for the defense. And Grantham was that spark. Yeah, he might have taken it a little far sometimes, but I think they were referred to as Grantham was the yin to Rick's yang. I mean, opposite attract kind of thing. Yeah. I think that was really good for the team, although, the defensive numbers weren't that great. But Rick was not pushing Grantham out the door. He told us he was completely up to Grantham. He said that, I think he had a couple bugs in his ears, and he went to Rick and was honest and was like, look, I've got a couple other opportunities. Rick said, listen, you still have a job here. You go and do your thing. And the reason he took the Louisville job was because he wanted, because of the money. I mean, $1 million for a 5-year contract. Who's going to say no to that? But he also wanted to coach with his brother. And Georgia laws, I don't know all the details, but they don't allow for that. You can't coach with your siblings or relatives on the field. So that was one of the things. But Rick was not pushing him out the door. Georgia fans might have been calling for his head, but Rick certainly wasn't. And so then we have Pruitt and Rick both laid back. They were very, very emotional, but, reserved at the press conference. There wasn't any, outbursts or any too much excitement there. But I think that we'll just have to wait and see, because Rick and Grantham, there was some controversy there, but they really did mesh well. And like I said, Grantham was a great spark to the defense.
Yeah.
We won't see that out of Pruitt. We won't see Pruitt screaming at coaches and starting fights. But I think they will coach obviously really well together, and we'll just have to wait and see how it all works out.
And you touched on something, and I'm sorry to hold you so long. We'll let you go in just a moment. But
no, I have. Yeah, I've got time.
Okay, but you mentioned on something. I think that on offense, you want a guy that's more laid back, that's more, because it's more into that approach. On defense, you do want a guy that's more fiery, because they have a different mentality on defense. And I think that's one thing I liked about Grantham, and I hope that Pruitt will bring some of that. But everything I've heard, I listened to some of the Florida State players talk about it, and they talked about how he came in and how things were really difficult, but he was such a great teacher. And I listened to these Florida State players talk about how he taught the game and made it so simplistic to them. And that's one thing I'm really excited about, because you look at the recruiting aspects, he's going to be able to recruit. I mean, that's obvious. This was a National Recruiter of the Year at one point. But his ability to get in there and to teach them young guys, because Georgia has an unbelievable amount of talent, but you didn't really see as much growth as you wanted to see during the season. There was some, but not as much as you were hoping for. And I think Pruitt could be that guy to bring that out in them.
I agree with you. The press conference was so packed, they only got to ask a couple questions. But one of my questions was to him, what was your message to the team in that introduction speech? And he told me that he wanted to get to know them. He was a high school coach. He got into this kind of lengthy story about how wherever he was coaching high school, that he didn't know when the kids' last meals were. He didn't know about, their family life, where they put their head down at night. He's a real team player, and he wants to get to know these players. He wants to know, how they work on the field, off the field. So I think that's going to have a lot to do with it. He wants to teach them. He wants to be their friend as well as their coach and mentor. He just seems like such a great person, and he really cares about his players. And I think that is going to be huge for the team. He just seemed like such a genuine person. And when he got into those stories about his high school, I think I said he won, back-to-back state championships one year. He really cares about the players and teaching them. And I think that will be huge on the defense for sure. And they need to be taught something.
Yeah. Hey, it's hard to argue. I'm not going to argue with the guy. He's got a couple state championships, got 4 national championships, and he's still a relatively young guy. So he's doing something right.
Absolutely.
Well, we sure appreciate you being on the show with us, Hannah. We hope to have you on again at some point. And once again, can you just tell, we talked about it with our listeners coming in, could you just tell them a little bit about your show and your Georgia show? And where
and I would love to come on. Again. It's called the Dawg Report, and it's on CSS every Monday at 11 p.m. And we have encores throughout the week on Tuesday and Wednesday. But it's basically, DJ Shockley and I and Roddy Nabulsi, basically just giving our mind about Georgia football, Georgia athletics. We have full recaps, highlights. DJ's hilarious on the show. We have great chemistry. So we have a lot of viewers. We all get involved on Twitter. Roddy, DJ, and I were all on Twitter, and we live chat throughout some of the commercials and stuff. So we have a good time with it. If you're a Georgia fan, it's a really good show to watch.
Absolutely. And you can also find her on Twitter at twitter.com /Hannah Chalker. So her tag is Hannah Hannah, Chalker, Chalker. Once again, we appreciate you being on the show with us, Hannah.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.